But in order to achieve a two-state solution, the reality is that things must change. Right now, there are four major obstacles standing in the way of two states. And until they are removed from the equation, there will never be peace in Israel and Gaza and the West Bank. The four major obstacles are Hamas and the Palestinians who support and tolerate their evil ways, radical right-wing Israelis in government and society, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I will explain each in detail. The first major obstacle to peace is Hamas and the Palestinians who support and tolerate their evil ways. Hamas is for the destruction of Israel, and in past decades, it undermined any hope for peace at every turn. It was Hamas who began its vicious campaign of suicide bombings against innocent Israelis to derail the nation-to-peace process in Oslo. It was Hamas who assassinated more moderate Palestinian political representatives in Gaza in 2007. It is Hamas who has held Gaza under repressive, undemocratic rule for close to 2 decades. And it is Hamas who targeted those brave Gazans who have spoken out against its actions or tried to bridge the divide between Israelis and Palestinians. Jewish Americans and Israelis alike have been appalled and hurt at efforts to rebrand Hamas, which is designated by the United States as a terrorist organization, as noble resistance or freedom fighters. Attempts to excuse their horrific actions against both Israelis and Palestinians are morally repugnant. A permanent ceasefire, effective immediately, would only allow Hamas to regroup and launch further attacks on Israeli civilians. There can never be a two-state solution if Hamas has any significant power. However, a temporary ceasefire, such as President Biden has proposed, which would allow for the return of hostages and humanitarian relief for suffering Palestinians, is quite different and is something I support. But any proposal that leaves Hamas with meaningful power is unacceptable to me and most Israelis. So it goes without saying that Hamas can not have any role in a future Gaza if we are to achieve peace. The same goes for the minority of Palestinians who support Hamas and those who demonstrate other forms of extremism, even if they're not card-carrying members. The Gazans who ventured into Israeli territory on October 7th to loot and pillage, the people in the West Bank who flooded the streets and cheered from afar the cold-blooded killing of mothers and children. This is appalling behavior. And while it may fall short of terrorism, it has no place in a peaceful future for Israel and Palestinians. And it ought to be denounced by the Palestinian public and their leaders who believe in a more sustainable future beyond the cycle of revenge. The second major obstacle to peace is radical right-wing Israelis in government and society. The worst example of this radicalism are Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and Ministry of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir. Minister Smotrich has in the past openly called for the subjugation and forced displacement of all Palestinians in the West Bank. In the current crisis, he has used inflammatory rhetoric and called for punitive restrictions on Palestinian farmers in the West Bank during the olive harvest. He has prevented the transfer of funds to the Palestinian Authority, and he has opposed the provision of any humanitarian assistance to Gaza, going so far as to stop agreed-upon shipments of flour. Minister Ben-Gvir is no better. When he was a young man, he was barred from the Israeli military service for his extremist views. Last year, in a move only intended to antagonize the Muslim population, he visited the Temple Mount with his supporters as a brazen show of force towards Palestinians. And during this current conflict, he has facilitated the mass distribution of guns to far-right settlers, exacerbating instability, fueling violence. There's a nastiness to what Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir believe and how they use their positions of authority and influence, an eagerness to inflame and provoke that is profoundly irresponsible and self-destructive. In my conversations with Israeli leaders, I've urged them to do more, to clamp down on the unacceptable vigilante settler violence in the West Bank. And I have supported the Biden administration's efforts to impose consequences for extremist settler violence. But the unfortunate reality is that this violence is openly supported by Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. As long as they hold their positions of power, no true progress will be made. While not equivalent, extremist Palestinians and extremist Israelis seek the same goal. From the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, they aim to push the other from the land. Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir may not say they want to kill all Palestinians outright, but they are clear in their desire to displace them from their homes and replace them with Israeli settlers. This is also abhorrent. As long as these two hold their positions of power, peace will be difficult, if not impossible, to achieve. The third major obstacle to peace is the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, who is beholden to his narrow political interests to the detriment of both the West Bank and Gaza. Over the years, President Abbas has evaded the democratic process, declining to hold future elections for over a decade and failing to empower future leadership. Despite his long tenure leading the Palestinian Authority, he has achieved few of his self-proclaimed goals. The Palestinian Authority remains corrupt and continues to incite instability through the martyr payment system. Palestinians are no more prosperous, no safer, no freer than they were when Abbas first took power. As a result, President Abbas has lost the trust of the Palestinian people. Furthermore, he's a terrible role model and spiritual leader. In the past, he has participated in outright Holocaust denial, attempting to justify Nazi actions. This embrace of anti-Semitism extended to his refusal for weeks to condemn the loss of Israeli civilian life on October 7th. Should Abbas remain, the Palestinian people can have no assurance that a Palestinian state would be able to ensure their safety or prosperity, nor can they have any belief that the government would be free of corruption. For there to be any hope of peace in the future, Abbas must step down and be replaced by a new generation of Palestinian leaders who will work towards attaining peace with a Jewish state. Otherwise, the West Bank will continue to suffer, and Hamas or some similarly extreme organization will continue to maintain a foothold in Gaza. The Palestinian Authority, under new leadership, must undertake a reform process and emerge as a revitalized PA that can viably serve as the basis for a Palestinian state with the trust of the Palestinian people. The fourth major obstacle to peace is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has all too frequently bowed to the demands of extremists like Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and the settlers in the West Bank. I have known Prime Minister Netanyahu for a very long time. While we have vehemently disagreed on many occasions, I will always respect his extraordinary bravery for Israel on the battlefield as a younger man. I believe in his heart he has his highest priority is the security of Israel. However, I also believe Prime Minister Netanyahu has lost his way by allowing his political survival to take the precedence over the best interests of Israel. He has put himself in coalition with far-right extremists like Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and as a result, he has been too willing to tolerate the civilian toll in Gaza, which is pushing support for Israel worldwide to historic lows. Israel cannot survive if it becomes a pariah. Prime Minister Netanyahu has also weakened Israel's political and moral fabric through his attempts to co-opt the judiciary, and he has shown zero interest in doing the courageous and visionary work required to pave the way for peace, even before this present conflict. As a lifelong supporter of Israel, it has become clear to me the Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th. The world has changed, radically since then. And the Israeli people are being stifled right now by a governing vision that is stuck in the past. Nobody expects Prime Minister Netanyahu to do the things that must be done to break the cycle of violence, to preserve Israel's credibility on the world stage, and to work towards a two-state solution. If he were to disavow Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and kick them out of his governing coalition, that would be a real meaningful step forward. But regrettably, there's no reason to believe Prime Minister Netanyahu would do that. He won't disavow Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir in their calls for Israelis to drive Palestinians out of Gaza and the West Bank. He won't commit to a military operation in Rafah that prioritizes protecting civilian life. He won't engage responsibly in discussions about a day-after plan for Gaza and a longer-term pathway to peace. Hamas and the Palestinians who support and tolerate their evil ways, radical right-wing Israelis in government and society, President Abbas, Prime Minister Netanyahu. These are the four obstacles to peace, and if we fail to overcome them, then Israel and the West Bank and Gaza will be trapped in the same violent state of affairs they've experienced for the last 75 years. These obstacles are not the same in their culpability for the present state of affairs, but arguing over which is the worst stymies our ability to achieve peace. Given the complexity and gravity of this undertaking, many different groups have a responsibility to see it through.